This is Badlands National Park in South Dakota. For a long time, they've been working to bring back the bison population, animals that were wiped out for decades for hunting, their hides, and to harm indigenous peoples. Now more than 1,000 of these prairie giants live here. A massive effort has paid off. And here we have the bison of Wind Cave National Park in South Dakota. There are a bit fewer animals here, around 500. Still, the same huge effort went into making this happen. This is Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota. Stunning views, right? But that's not why we're here. We're here for the bison, of course. They've been reintroduced here too, and just like elsewhere, it's been a big success. Right now, around 400 of them live in the park. Basically, the recovery's going full steam ahead. But then, suddenly, bison from all 3 national parks moved down to the southern part of South Dakota, onto land owned by a native tribe. Why? In a nutshell, those lands just couldn't carry on anymore. But if you want the long version, we'll tell you everything right now. So South Dakota, just like any other part of North America where colonizers set foot, these lands saw a total wipeout of the bison. In the south of South Dakota, where there hadn't been a single herd for over 100 years, this disaster hit especially hard. The loss of bison left behind not just empty land, but a whole chain of consequences that became painfully clear just a few decades after the giants of the prairie were gone. Instead of the vanished bison, livestock took over these lands, but heavy grazing by cows and sheep didn't fill the gap. It only made things worse. The pastures were depleted. Vast patches of scorched earth appeared, and the old vegetation never grew back on its own. Land that had been rented out for short-term grazing over many years lost its productivity, and that shows clearly in reports on land degradation in South Dakota. Degraded pastures led to a noticeable drop in soil fertility year after year. The land lost organic matter and the ability to support a diverse plant cover. Instead of the typical mixed grasslands of the Great Plains, just a few hardy species began to dominate the fields, ones that couldn't feed the local wildlife. This kind of uniform vegetation doesn't hold moisture well, so the soil gets damaged even harder by wind and water erosion. It was the animals that suffered the most. With bison gone and pastures taken over by domestic livestock, biodiversity took a serious hit. Many kinds of birds, small mammals, and insects that had thrived in lush, varied grasslands were left with fewer food options and hiding spots. By the mid-1900s, the once vibrant landscapes had already started losing a wide range of species. On top of that, the absence of bison seriously weakened the ecosystem's ability to handle climate extremes. Dry spells in the region started having more severe consequences. Monoculture pastures couldn't provide shelter or food, and the depleted soil couldn't retain enough moisture to survive droughts. As a result, droughts triggered dust storms and topsoil degradation, making erosion even worse and causing dust to settle over nearby towns. It's worth noting that, obviously, the slaughter of the bison seriously hurt the native people. A big part of southern South Dakota is the land of the Lakota tribe, specifically their branch, the Sicangu-Oyate. And for them, just like for many other native peoples, the bison isn't just an animal, but a sacred symbol of the bond between humans and nature. The loss of these animals tore the generational ties to traditions, and the ceremonial practices once closely tied to bison migration and hunting now face the risk of fading away. Losing this cultural code made it even clearer that bringing the bison back is not just about restoring the ecosystem, but also about reviving the community's shared identity. Besides, the socioeconomic situation in the reservation, especially because of the lack of bison, remained really tough. The county is one of the poorest in the U.S. Locals have limited opportunities for sustainable farming and no access to varied quality food. Early attempts to make up for the food shortage with livestock only helped temporarily, but the meat and milk often got sold outside the reservation, and native families still faced shortages of fresh produce and steady jobs. All this sparked the beginning of a huge project, whose goal was to bring bison back to South Dakota to the natural grazing lands of Walakota Buffalo Range and Rosebud. The project was taken on by the tribe I've mentioned before, the Economic Development Corporation, and the Rosebud Tribal Enterprises, along with the World Wildlife Fund. They also brought in bison to Walakota Buffalo Range from different places: Badlands National Park, Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota, Wind Cave, and the Rocky Mountain Arsenal National Wildlife Refuge in Colorado. Another well-known environmental organization, American Prairie from Montana, also donated bison to the project, and all this was backed up by the Bison Conservation Initiative from the U.S. Department of the Interior. Overall, just from all this, you can tell the project is really serious, big, and ambitious. They plan to bring back over 1,500 prairie giants to the Walakota buffalo range, but even that doesn't show the full scale. The project concept was developed over more than 5 years. Plans were made, relationships between the participants were strengthened and officially formalized. The land, almost 28,000 hectares, which was previously used as a cattle ranch owned by a former U.S. Supreme Court judge, was sold back to the tribe. And then, on October 30th, 2020, the withered lands of Walakota Buffalo Range felt the powerful tread of those animals for the first time in many years. Animals that once kept the prairies in their original state. 100 bison arrived, 50 from Badlands National Park and another 50 from Theodore Roosevelt Park. Besides that, in the same month, 61 and 2-year-old bison arrived at their new home from Wind Cave. Then, in November, Walakota Buffalo Range got more bison from Rocky Mountain Arsenal. One of the most memorable moments of the project happened in April 2021. On the Walakota Buffalo Range, calves were born for the first time in at least 140 years. And after that, the bison releases picked up steam. We won't go into detail about every bison release, but let's just say there were a lot of them. So many, in fact, that by spring 2022, there were already 1,000 giants roaming the Walakota Buffalo Range. And then, in April 2024, researchers noted that over 1,200 bison were now grazing on the local grasslands. Reaching the final goal of 1,500 bisons already within reach, and judging by how fast the herd is growing, pretty soon all the project's participants will be able to say, mission accomplished. Meanwhile, everyone can already give themselves some credit, because with the bison returning, a transformation has begun in areas that had been fading for years without their key inhabitants. Cows and sheep have been herded by humans for hundreds of years, so they don't have that instinct that something wild might be hunting them. Because of that, they move slowly, stand around in one spot for ages, and eat everything they can see or reach with their mouths. That's exactly why so many areas ended up degraded after being grazed by cattle. Bison, on the other hand, behave in a totally different way. In the wild, they've got predators, and they know it on a genetic level. That's why the giants of the prairie move quickly from one spot to another, never staying too long in one place. This leads to a mix of heavily and lightly grazed areas, a patchwork of short and tall grass, or put another way, it creates pastures with a mosaic-like structure. This kind of bison behavior keeps a single plant species from taking over the pastures, and at the same time helps native species survive. The return of bison also helps keep invasive and weedy species in check. In areas with animals, such aggressive annuals show up half as often. Bison just regularly munch on them in their early growth stages, which lowers the competitiveness of these nuisance plants. As a result, native warm season grasses get the space they need to bounce back and grow stronger. As a result, grazing by bison has a major impact on prairie vegetation. For instance, in one study, researchers tracked the changes caused by bison grazing over the course of 29 years. They discovered that native prairie grasses increased their species diversity by 103% on a small 100-square-foot patch and by 86% on a larger 44-acre area compared to spots where bison weren't grazing. It's important to point out that bison actually improve prairie soil just by walking around. As the herd moves, their hooves work like natural plows, tearing through the dense biological crust and breaking up large soil chunks into finer pieces. The disappearance of everything that doesn't belong in healthy soil leads to better water infiltration when it rains. As you can imagine, this also helps improve the state of prairie flora, since plants get more of the essential resource from the soil they grow in. And yes, of course, the water that seeps into the ground doesn't just stay there or get taken up by plants. It can go deeper, much deeper, down into underground aquifers. That's why bison are actually a reason those underground reservoirs can refill. People are really thankful for this because they can pump water from the aquifers. And the prairie plants will appreciate this as well, since the aquifer's water can naturally reach the upper soil layers, feeding every plant on the surface. It's also worth noting that a hard soil crust acts like a shell, causing water to rush off quickly without soaking in, which leads to surface runoff and washes away the fertile layer. In short, that's erosion. Regular movement of bison breaks this crust into tiny microdepressions that act like thousands of miniature ponds. They retain water during downpours and slow it down. Studies under heavy rain showed that areas with hoof-damaged soil lose 25% less topsoil compared to smooth, untouched ground. Over time, as the herd repeatedly follows the same routes, a patchy micro-relief forms in the pastures, alternating areas of denser soil and zones with looser soil where water seeps deeper. This helps avoid the usual hardening of the surface that comes with intense stationary grazing and keeps the landscape's ability to soak up rainfall steady. You think the benefits for the soil and plants end there? Of course not, because bison have manure. No, scratch that. A whole lot of manure. On average, this animal produces about 44 pounds of waste every day. When hoofed animals move across the prairies, they leave behind piles that become hotspots for earthworms and dung beetles. These invertebrates bury the droppings into the top layers of soil, loosening it up, helping with aeration and creating channels for water and plant roots. Bison manure serves as a concentrated source of key nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which are essential for the growth of grasses and flowering plants. As the organic material breaks down, nitrogen gradually shifts from ammonium form to nitrate, providing long-lasting and even feeding for root systems. Phosphorus strengthens plant cell walls and encourages the development of a strong root network, while potassium improves water balance and boosts resistance to stresses like drought and frost. Besides the main macronutrients, manure contains trace elements, magnesium, calcium, selenium, and zinc that boost the enzymatic activity of soil microbes. Bacteria and fungi break down the organic matter and create humus, which improves moisture retention and soil aggregate stability. Soil rich in organic matter becomes looser, making it easier for air and water to penetrate, which in turn creates better conditions for earthworms and other helpful invertebrates. As a result, regular deposits of bison manure into the soil turn pastures into highly productive ecosystems. Plants get the essential nutrients they need to grow, roots strengthen and dig deeper into the soil, and the soil structure becomes more stable. This natural fertilizer cycle ensures long-term fertility without any artificial additives, supporting the health of the pastures and their resilience to climate swings. Bison aren't called a keystone species for nothing, since by restoring patchy prairies, they help boost the area's biodiversity. Why? It's because some animals prefer short grass. For example, prairie dogs who can't live with tall grass, they can't spot predators. Other animals, on the other hand, need tall grass, like many birds typical of the prairies. There are also species that would never choose to live anywhere without both short and tall grass. Take this odd-looking bird, for example. The sharp-tailed grouse. Females of this species build shallow nests right on the ground in places where thick, tall grass can hide them. It helps keep predators away, and that dense, sky-reaching grass also serves as a hiding place for the grown-up birds, letting them stay out of sight from anything hunting them, as well as sheltering them from bad weather. Short grass is important for these animals because that's where they find food. Seeds from different grasses and plants, as well as insects, especially locusts and crickets. It's all much easier to spot where the grass hasn't grown too tall. And of course, when talking about these birds, we can't leave out the fact that short grass areas are crucial for the males of the species. That's where they gather to perform their display dances. And females need these areas too. It makes it easier to watch the show. When grass of the same height spreads across the prairies, only animals suited for those conditions live there. When bison create a patchy structure, the conditions diversify and more species can settle. That's how bison end up boosting biodiversity in these areas. Everyone knows that even in degraded prairies, there are insects, right? The flying, biting kind? Well, bison know it too. Bugs annoy them the most because these animals don't have hands to swat the pesky critters. But the key species of the prairies has another trick to deal with bites: rolling in the dirt. This behavior also helps each bison regulate its body temperature, but for us in the prairies, the most important thing is that when a bison rolls, it helps even the most degraded land start to recover. So picture this. A bison eats in one spot, picks up seeds on its skin and fur, then wanders into a degrading area and starts rolling around to escape insect bites. In the process, all the weeds on that patch get wiped out, and then the seeds fall off its fur. For them, the cleared out spot is just perfect, because there are no plants that usually spread like crazy, take up all the space, and suck the nutrients from the soil. Besides that, these wallows collect rainwater so the plants will get the most important resource they need to grow. And also, as you remember, bison produce manure, fertilizer packed with nutrients that are great for plants. And that manure can end up either in the wallow or nearby, so the plants growing in this animal-made dip basically have everything they need. Bison wallows also play a key role in the prairie's water cycle. In the dry prairie climate, these seasonal ponds are life-saving oases, providing vital water for all kinds of small animals, from rodents and hares to different species of birds and insects. Moreover, these temporary pools become critically important breeding spots for amphibians like frogs and salamanders, whose larvae need water to develop. The pits can literally turn into little wetlands that, besides amphibians, also attract birds, insects, and even mammals. In this way, the wallows in the ground create unique, moist microenvironments standing out amidst the surrounding dry land, which helps boost overall water availability in the landscape. And finally, let's not forget about the Sikangu-Oyate tribe, for whom buffalo are sacred animals. Obviously, the Walakota Buffalo Range Project has already brought back something people hadn't seen in years, the return of creatures deeply tied to their traditions and way of life. Already, the project is improving the tribe's economic situation. The newly appeared bison have created new jobs related to managing the herd, taking care of the pastures, and processing the meat. All of this is income that the local people have been missing. Besides that, a huge window of opportunities for organizing ecotourism has opened up, because just imagine, a herd of the main prairie animals already counting over 1,200 individuals roaming through what used to be withered lands. There are tons of people who'd want to come and pay to somehow interact with creatures that have already become legendary for the U.S. and for all of North America. So the animals bring benefits from every angle.